I think we should start now. Dr. Mukherjee, with your permission, shall we start?
Yes, sure. Good morning. Sure.
Okay. Okay. Uh, Very good morning to everyone. I, Saurav Mukhopadhyay, on behalf of Chandrakona Vidyasagar Mahavidyalaya, would like to welcome you all in this session. And this is the second day of International and Interdisciplinary Conference on Globalization, Impact on Society, Culture and Education, organized by Chandrakona Vidyasagar Mahavidyalaya in collaboration with Institute for Cross-Cultural Studies and Academic Exchange, Burlington, NC, USA. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know. Such harmonious madness from my lips would flow. The world should listen then as I am listening now. And yes, at this crucial juncture, it can be about that we will be listening to some thoughtful deliberations from some extinguished speakers, and I'm looking forward to getting enlightened with their views. Now, to start the proceeding, let me introduce Dr. Sudip Mukherjee, who will be the moderator of this session. Dr. Mukherjee is Associate Professor of English at Netaji Subhas Open University, Kolkata. He holds a PhD in post-colonial Indian drama from Vishwabharat University, has interest in South Asian literature. His forthcoming publication, a co-edited volume titled Ibsen in the Decolonized South Asian Theatre, is under publication agreement with Routledge. Thank you, sir, for gracing this session with your presence. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Saurabh. I'm audible, I hope.
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, okay. Thank you for that very warm welcome to all of us in this session. This is, as I understand, it's an online session purely, so all our participants are there in the online mode, all our presenters rather. First and foremost, there's one thing that I would like to share with all of you, which I'm sure many of our panelists will also agree, that a conference on this theme, on these multiplicity of themes, if I may, and within that, a session that is devoted exclusively to education in the current scenario, globalization, and of course, in the light of NEP 2020, is perhaps the call of the hour. And what actually gives me a lot of happiness is, as I was going through the abstracts that Samana had sent, the first thing that I felt is that, it's so comforting to see that so many academics, researchers, and independent scholars are actually debating and debating discursively on the wider ramifications of NEP 2020, which perhaps is something that none of us can shy away from at whatever levels of education or with educational institutions we might be associated. So, like Shorab said, I too would really look forward to a plethora of issues being identified, talked, discussed by the very eminent panelists that we have. So, if we can begin, I guess we can follow the sequence that has been sent.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. So, in that sense, our first speaker would be
Akash Bhattacharya.
Akash Bhattacharya. Right. Akash is there. I've seen Akash. Very good morning. To introduce Akash, he is Assistant Professor of Literature at the School of Liberal Studies, UPES, and was awarded the doctoral degree in 2020 from the Center of
I'm
English.
sorry, that's not Akash Bhattacharya, that's Akash Raha.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
And you are
sorry.
Akash Bhattacharya.
No, I'm Akash Raha.
You are Akash Raha.
We have two
Yes,
Akashes in this session.
Okay, okay, okay. Anyway, you are the first speaker, Akash, right?
Dr.
Akash Rahat
Bhattacharya.
is the first speaker in
No,
the
He said
sequence that
Akash,
someone has
Akash
sent to me.
Bhattacharya is the first speaker in this session.
Akash
Akash
Bhattacharya.
Bhattacharya. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Akash Bhattacharya is to speak on the national education policies, Karnataka laboratory, remaking school systems and syllabi. I hope I'm right.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Right, right, right. And very interestingly, Akash is a historian of education. He has researched the history of the sorry, operationalization of liberal education in colonial India. He holds interest in education policy and the trajectories of post-colonial liberalism. He is an independent academic, a political activist, and a former faculty at the School of Education, Azim Premji University, Bangalore. And Akash, as I said, is to speak on the National Education Policy's Karnataka Laboratory, remaking school systems and syllabi. And before I hand over to Akash, let me just share with you the organizers have given us a 20 minutes window for each speaker to deliberate. I would not really like to interrupt and poke in the middle of it. So let's all keep to time so that we have time enough on our hands for a good discussion. Akash, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to present my work over here. So, what I will present today is a set of observations on the way the national education policy is being implemented in Karnataka. And on the basis of these observations, to try and speak to some of the ongoing debates on the national education policy. To start with, when the NEP came, it was welcomed by many politicians, policy experts, policy analysts, academicians, educators, and so on. And it's particularly relevant to discuss NEP in a conference on globalization because NEP was pitched as the kind of educational framework that India needs to meet the challenges of 21st century globalization, which will be defined by technology and the so called fourth industrial revolution. There has also been a lot of discussion about India's place in the world, especially in the unfolding multipolar world with China as an emerging giant or already a giant right next door, and the need for India to present itself as a Vishwaguru. And as an associated feature of that, the need for a cultural renaissance in a globalizing world rooted in ancient Indian culture. That's the overall pitch of the NEP, so to say, and it's very deeply rooted in the current global moment and the way the policymakers see global politics and economics unfold in the years to come. So it's very relevant that we are talking about NEP, connecting it with globalization. But now, when it comes to the actual implementation, we were told repeatedly that one shouldn't make too much of the document because a lot of discussions were centered on the actual text of the policy at that point when it came out. We were told that the God lies in execution, so we must wait for the execution to start and then see how it actually unfolds. So well and good. I think all of us have been observing the execution of the NEP wherever we have been based in the recent past. So I would like to share some of the observations of how NEP is seeking to transform school systems in Karnataka in two parts. One is, of course, the school structure and the school syllabi. I'll highlight some of the core points that have come up in the reports that have been prepared by the government of Karnataka and the white papers that have been prepared by the education departments. So let me present here the slide. Yeah, yeah. So the first couple of points focus on the way the administration is being redone, the school administration and the school regulation, and also the operation because Karnataka has not had a K-12 K to 12 structure. The plus two has been under a very different kind of an arrangement called the PUC, the pre-university college. So right now the focus is on integrating all of them into a single structure, into a single K-12 structure. And also alongside that, what they're calling the separation between the separation between the regulation and the operation of schooling. Now, some of the details on that I'll read out from one of the white papers that has been produced. What exactly is meant by the separation of regulation from the operationalization? Um, just a moment. So there is an effort now to create separate bodies to eliminate conflict of interest. The Department of School Education will be responsible for policy making and overall monitoring, while the Directorate of School Education will handle the operations of the public school system. And also, a new council is being created, which will be called the Karnataka School Education Council, to oversee all aspects at a macro level and coordinate between the various agencies and bodies and liaison between the various departments and bodies connected to school education and the government. So that's a huge responsibility being given to this council. And just to talk of the number of bodies involved in the whole affair, integration of the K to 12 structure doesn't mean that the number of bodies reduce, or in fact they actually increase. So now it seems that each stage of school education could have directors, but aligned to the new structure. Foundational and preparatory years, middle school and high school, that will be the new structure. But additionally, there will be a separate foundational years wing, ideally located where the maximum activity is expected to take place. This wing will work under the state coordination unit and coordinate all curricular and pedagogic activities for early years between the Women and Child Development Ministry, and will also work on the ground with the Anganwadis as part of the early years of education. It will also further work with various foundations and schools which implement the Nalikali curriculum to align Nalikali to the last 2 years of the foundational stage. So, in a sense, we find that the number of bodies which will be part of the new educational structure actually increase, and the foundational years wing will have a very important role to play in implementing the NEP. So clearly, this council, the Karnataka School Education Council, will become a body of immense importance. And in the recent past, some of the major public controversies has been about the appointment of people into these councils, into the education councils as they exist, and also into the syllabus revision committees. And on that, of course, there is no clear guideline on what basis these appointments should be made. The white paper and the report, they clearly say that this is entirely under the discretion of the government to decide who are the best people to be a part of this council to oversee the whole implementation. Again, the point being that yes, of course, the God lies in execution, but as the execution is beginning, we still find that on some of the very crucial issues concerning the implementation, there is a lot of vagueness. I mean, if you have a council, who are the people who will be in the council? What does it mean for a council to coordinate between this range of different bodies? Again, that's a very crucial matter on which we don't yet find a lot of clarification coming from the government. One very important concern regarding NEP has been what happens to the question of equitable education, inclusive education. Because on the one hand, the NEP has said that the idea is to take it further forward. But at the same time, some of the important instruments through which equality in education has sought to be achieved. So, for instance, affirmative action. The NEP has given it a short shrift without really clarifying on what happens to it. And in fact, important categories on which affirmative action is based, like caste, like gender, they have been in many ways downplayed and all merged into this vast socio-economically disadvantaged group. There is a separate mention of gender in the terms of an identity, that the question of gender identity should be taken seriously in the new syllabus and the new structure. Now, the point being that, look, both caste and gender as distinct axes of oppression and exclusion, more than, of course, an identity, but more than an identity in terms of a system. The fact that over a period of time these categories have been accepted as principal basis for affirmative action is the result of prolonged social and political struggles which have happened within the sphere of education as well as outside the sphere of education. That being the case, merging everything into ACDG has led to certain question marks. Now, if you look at Karnataka, what it says is that the idea is to reach children from socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. Again, when it comes to the implementation, there is no separate mention of caste and gender as basis for socioeconomic disadvantage. There's mention of disability, of course, but no one has ever said that disability should not be included or that these are mutually contradictory. Uh, so the white paper claims that the objective is to reach children from socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, and an instrument that is going to be used now, and there is a huge emphasis on this in Karnataka now, which is the setting up of special educational zones. Special educational zones, they will be set up in disadvantaged regions across the country to act upon all that is stated in the policy for inclusion of ACDG. It comes from the NEP, but Karnataka especially claims that um, this will be one of the major ways in which the question of equity will be addressed. So it says that the SEZs, we have another SEZ now. SEZs should be established across the state where ACDG are in large numbers. For example, Chamrajnagar and Malnad regions could have SEZs along with areas in the coastal districts as well as the northwest. Now, these are definitely economically backward districts. But how exactly is this backwardness going to be addressed through education, through setting up of SEZs? That is not particularly clear. A special task force to identify SEZs with specific sections within zones based on the criteria on the NEP could be established for this specific purpose. There's also talk of a large number of scholarships for students in school education. However, these are benefits from different departments which require streamlining. So, the point being, what exactly does this special educational zone mean? Does it mean it's a space where there will be more scholarships? How do you ensure greater access in these regions? Are these regions going to get more government funding? There is no mention of any of that, but the primary thrust on addressing the question of equity is through the special educational zones, as the white paper and the initial report of the task force to implement the NEP claims. There's of course the question of school merger that's been taken very seriously as part of NEP implementation. Now, school merger has another interesting dimension that now it claims that once these school complexes are formed, teacher recruitment will now be for specific school complexes and not just for specific schools. Now, again, the rationale there is the need to streamline further, and that comes with a range of other benefits which the white paper says are going to be given. Teachers will be incentivized to serve in rural areas, and merit based scholarships will be available for undertaking teacher education. Teacher transfers will be reduced, and teachers will be recruited to the school complex to increase stability. Now, talking of stability, over the last couple of years, there have been several movements going on of ad hoc teachers and guest teachers in Karnataka asking to be made permanent. Um, Again, it's not something which has been picked up by any mainstream political organization to make it a political issue. Issues on which uh, national discourse is created, issues on which elections are won or lost. So it's not got much visibility, but the question of contractualization of teaching has been a major one in Karnataka in the recent past. So again, to get back to the promises being made for teachers, there is no mention of the question of stability of their livelihood, the question of stability of their jobs. Although the national education policy does say that there is a need to increasingly stabilize teaching jobs by um, you know having more of regular recruitment of teachers, but the white paper over here makes no such promises. It talks of merit based teacher career development which will be facilitated with options to move into teacher education or educational administration after a minimum number of teaching years. Flexible and modular approach where teachers choose what and how they want to learn will be the basis of continuous teacher professional development. So these are some of the points which have been made with regard to teacher education, the special educational zones which are being discussed now, and the separation of regulation and operation and building an integrated structure. The other major point, or flashpoint rather, in the recent past has been the new position papers that have come in. The new position papers covering a range of covering a range of subjects. Now, I'd like to focus on one particular subject which has been much more in the public debate, which is a subject called knowledge of India. Um, Now, this has been a debated issue ever since the NEP was implemented. That what is the cultural basis of the knowledge that is going to be taught? So, to give you some excerpts from this Knowledge of India paper, based on my analysis, it's been declared that Sanskrit or Samskrita is the language in which the overwhelming majority of Indian knowledge is available. And the paper recommends that Sanskrit is taught from the early childhood because it will help students in understanding of the concepts of knowledge of India. It is also suggested that Sanskrit should be made the compulsory third language. The position paper derives the meaning of India not from the India described in the constitution, but by the Vishnu Puran, by Sri Ramachandra and later, of course, Bankim Chandra. The Vishnu Puran defines Bharata as the land north of the oceans and south of the Himalayas. It says, while the idea of Bharata that truly resonates in the hearts of our children is the one uttered by Sri Ramachandra, Janani Janma Bhumischa Swaradhi Rahiyasi, and reaffirmed by Bankim Chandra as the idea of Bharat Mata. The lack of understanding of India in such cultural idioms is blamed on the decades of education systems that were followed, and this is from the position paper. And I'm quoting from the paper now, which in the garb of secularization have systematically ushered our impressionable minds into the zone of rootlessness and ignorance of the achievements by their own ancestors. The position paper also parrots a certain claim that's been made by certain forces. Under quotes, for a nation that has been colonized for nearly thousands of years, it is only in the recent past that she is awakening to the concept of decoloniality. Thus, the position paper, Knowledge of India, authenticates with one stroke the narrative that Muslim rule is considered colonization of Hindu India along with British colonization. And secondly, implying that those who arrived in India before those thousands of years are the original inhabitants of the region, also trying to erase the debate over the Aryan migration. So decolonizing in a sense seems to mean de-Islamizing, for which another word could be re-Brahminizing. Even in other secular fields like economics, geography, botany, and administration, where there are many pioneers and contributors from non-Brahmin communities, the suggestion is the position paper is to learn from texts like Arthashastra, Pancha Mahabhuta, etc. It adds the idea of good governance from Shanti Parva of Mahabharat, lessons of corporate governance from Kautilya's Arthashastra, management concepts from Indian knowledge, administration and social life under Vijayanagara is what needs to be foregrounded. It also mentions the Gupta Empire, in which period the Varna system is known to have degenerated into a very oppressive caste system, as instrumental in shaping the Bharatiya civilization. And it cites the invasion of Muslim rulers as the cause of decline of Buddhism, and the census introduced by the British as the reason for the proliferation of the caste system. It, of course, absolves Manusmriti of propagating any social stratification based on birth. The social science position paper relies heavily on S.N. Balagangadhara's writings as source material, which completely rejects the existence of the caste system during the Hindu rule. The position paper also claims that the Devalaya-centered school system that prevailed prior to the British did not have any caste-based discrimination. And in the future also, the Devalaya premises could serve as a great center of education for multiple disciplines, ranging from art, sculpture, architecture to cultural practices. Interestingly, the position paper says that the students should develop a critical mind and should encourage the attitude of questioning and not merely accepting whatever the textbooks say as infallible truth. And it calls the Pythagoras theorem and apple falling on Newton as fake news. But the position paper, in the same vein, demands acceptance of whatever is written in the Smritis, including Manusmriti and the Puranas, and calls any critique of Brahminism as a colonial construct. In dealing with the Indian way of understanding history, the paper calls for intellectual bravery to speak the truth about, again, I'm quoting, events such as the genocide of the Malabar Hindus, the genocide of Maharashtrian Brahmins, and the genocide and exodus of Kashmiri Hindus, and they should be taught in mainstream textbooks. While all these three events are important, no doubt, a certain bias is evident when Dalit massacres by Savarna Hindus are not even mentioned. Additionally, the position paper on health and well being says eggs and meat should not be served to children as they lead to lifestyle disorders under quotes. Um, so that's the long and short of some of the things which are going on there. Now I want to talk a bit about the way the civil society over there has taken this. It's a raging public debate going on all of these issues. Karnataka happens to be um, one of the states, to my knowledge, perhaps the first state, where a range of Dalit organizations and left organizations and other progressive organizations have united to together condemn the NEP as a policy framework, which is different from specifically critiquing elements of the policy as they are being implemented. And the thrust in the critique of the Dalit Sangharsh Samiti, and there are many factions of DSS, but there is now again a coming together of the various DSS factions. Um, and DSS, the DSS factions coming together, they have clearly uh, made a clear thrust on looking at the political ideological dimension of the NEP, on what is going to be taught and how it is going to be taught, the school structure, how it is a recipe for increasing inequality. That's what the resolution of the DSS in the Mahasammelan that was held on Baba Sahib Ambedkar's Mahaparinirvan Divas, it claimed. Um, Devanur Mahadeva, who is one of the original founders of the DSS, recently wrote a book, RSS Breadth and Depth, where in the third section he clearly detailed which are the policy frameworks which tend to reflect the framework of Hindu nationalism very directly. And then again, he makes a clear mention of the national education policy. And one of the reasons why the policy framework itself is being identified in Karnataka as in terms of its political ideological dimension is also because of the churning going on there right now in terms of the a range of other events which are very much tied to the NEP. So, for instance, the hijab ban, which has been going on, leading to the dropouts of scores of Muslim girls from the schools. I happened to attend a couple of seminars on NEP implementation organized by Azim Premji University and a couple of other organizations in Bangalore, where people from the IT sector in Bangalore, they came and they spoke very much strongly in favor of the NEP. And I posed this question to them that when you talk about universal public education, what are we going to say about the Muslim girls who are dropping out? I mean, ideologically, isn't somewhere there a connection between the way the NEP understands India and Indianness and the way certain policies are persecuting Muslims in Karnataka at present? And the answer that I got was that that is a political thing that is going on, and education should be kept separate from politics. Now, that's, I don't know how many of us over here will agree or disagree with it, but um, even prior to the national education policy's promulgation, or even now, this has been a very consistent attitude among many educators, academicians, and policy experts that policy is something which is sacrosanct, which is devoid of politics, which is something done on the basis of scientific study and so on and so forth, and should be kept separate from politics. If there's one argument that I want to strongly put forward over here is that there is a need to, of course, observe the way NEP is being implemented everywhere, but we need to make constant connections to the implementation at the micro levels and the overall political ideological thrust of the policy and the regime which has pushed through this policy. It is only when we make this connection. So, for instance, I think the SEZs which are being set up in Karnataka is actually a very good example where questions of discrimination and systematic oppression, exclusion, they are really being invisibilized. There is no clear promise or clear statement on how exactly this inclusion is going to happen through the SEDG. I mean, of course, you identify a special zone because it is backward and set up schools, but how is it any different from earlier processes of setting up schools in villages and various other backward areas of the country? There is no clear reference to any of that, any of the details, and SEZ is being touted as the new model which will solve the problem of inequality and ensure equity in access. Now we won't understand the full implication of this invisibility or this lack of clarity unless we connect it to the overall political ideological thrust, which is one of increasing inequality at at a material level. So there's destruction of jobs, there's a huge loan waivers given to corporates, There's a certain alliance which we can see between the government and the corporates. And we also see a strong casteist thrust of the current ruling dispensation. Now, again, these things in academic seminars, I feel are increasingly becoming a bit of a taboo, in the sense that, these things are there in the background, and then what do we do about it? We analyze the policy, we analyze the text, we look at some figures, we look at some numbers, but the numbers don't speak for themselves, neither do texts. So that's going to be the core of my argument, that of course all of us are living through the implementation of NEP, but to really understand its its implication, there is a need to connect the grainy details that we find wherever we are to the framework of the policy, and the political ideological thrust of the regime which is pushing through this policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akash. You have rightfully pointed both aspects that I understand are very integral parts of your research. That is the policy at the level of a policy and its execution. And definitely, where the politics comes in is something that we will continue to pursue with an open mind. We will come to interactions at the end of the session, as I understand. But then there is something that I would like to say. I think it would be better if questions, as and when they come into your minds, please keep writing them in the message boxes so that we can have them together at the end of it. This is for everyone who's attending the session. So we move now to the second speaker, and this time it is Akash Raha. I'm sorry, Akash, I got it wrong the first time.
That's absolutely okay.
So,
Thanks.
Akash, as I was saying, is Assistant Professor of Literature at the School of Liberal Studies, UPES. He was awarded the doctoral degree in 2020 from the Center for English and Cultural Studies, JNU. He's earlier been teaching at IIM Indore and IIT Delhi too. And Akash has been a UGC DAAD Research Fellow at the Institute of Modern Philologies, University of Würzburg in Germany. He's been Charles Collis Fellow in Residence at King's India Institute, King's College London, and has also been a Fulbright Scholar at the University of Kansas. Today, Akash speaks on changing contours of higher education in a globalized India. Akash.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very generous introduction. Thank you. Uh, so, right to the topic, changing contours of higher education in a globalized India. I think a lot of those words are doing a lot of heavy carrying. But just to say, what do we mean by globalization? Yes, to begin with, globalization, this did promise us a more integrated world, right? And that is something that everyone appreciated. That's something that everyone wanted. There have been a lot of labor movements which have been wanted more democratization of labor movements across boards. Uh, but in terms of market and productivity, when we think means of production, we imagine labor, capital, and land. Uh, However, globalization entailed that a template of investor right was something that was commonalized across markets. So for investors, those who had capital and land, globalization was excellent. But for the labor market, it didn't necessarily make it a more integrated world. Again, this template of investor rights, which was naturalized across countries, India included, um, focused and privileged those with already privilege and power. Um, and this was unfortunate for the labor market, which also meant the citizenry. So how do we then imagine uh, the people in this market? Do we then talk about them as citizens or necessarily always as customers? And where do they become one or the other is, I believe, an interesting question. The governments obviously have sided with these investors, people with capital, because that promises them a higher GDP. At least that's something that they can market. It is always a marketable thing to suggest that our Sensex and our Nifties are going higher. And and for the citizens of India, it becomes a drawback. They are in a catch-22 situation. Anyway, so the story of the education sector, as we all know, and we were just talking about NEP 2020, is no different. The education can also be now correlatively talked about as the education market, education sector. And unfortunately, the trends in the education market in the last years in India, in higher education in India, has been that private education systems are growing, uh, public education systems are constantly being defunded, and my talk today just generally tries to understand where this could probably lead us. So again, yes, the private university systems have thrived in India. Uh, we have seen them grow in the last 10, 20 years. In rankings, NAC, NIRF ranking, they do very well. Swati will have a more critical paper to present on how all of this is already a sham in order to push the private universities to create that level playing field that India promised in the WTO GATS that we will create for the private education systems in India. Again, of course, they thrive. They have the government working with them, protecting their rights, investor rights. They have all the capital in the world to thrive. They have government intervention and support, and at the same time, there's a strategic public defund strategic defunding of public universities. Noam Chomsky in Requiem of an American Dream, of course, several years back, talks about this from the American context. He talks about how systems are privatized. You defund the public system, it stops working. You show it as an example to people. See, this doesn't work. Of course, this doesn't work. This has never worked. And hence, you push towards a private model of working. So in this case, a private education model, a private education system. There are a lot of counters to this. The government or the private players would say that this is democratization of education. This democratizes education for everyone, makes it accessible for all of India. This is like a corporate scheme. You come take loan from us and you get good education. You get world quality education. I understand but they will also speak about this later today in much more details. Um, uh, but however, this democratization of the education, I don't think the argument and the numbers match up. So if we see the GER numbers by the Aishi MHRD ministry from the last several years, we would see that the numbers are stagnant. At times they're just played with, but there is no great change in it. SC, ST, OBC numbers are still low. Every 2 years, they show a zero point 0.5, 1% increase, with, I don't know, statistical data being played with. But we also realize that this cooperative scheme of loan giving and it also marginalizes people more because buying power is also influenced by your social status, etc. There's income inequality, and only those will be able to access more loans who already have that kind of privilege in that market, unfortunately. So this democratization of education is a sham logic, of course. This access that the government wants to provide to its citizenry for the next several years is, of course, seemingly sham too. Uh, and unfortunately, what this does is it entrenches pre-existing inequities, which is to say that those who are already at the marginals will now have to take huge amount of loans to get to the education system to study. And what happens then? A US like student debt crisis. This is something that I would like to touch upon right at the end of this brief talk. So yeah, this idea again of democratization is also a little problematic because we now see how different income groups are being targeted. Which is to say, earlier we had an imagination of private education being for rich people. Uh, Unfortunately, that is not necessarily true. There's a brilliant paper by Nandini Chandra, the Surplus University, in which she says that now education is not just being marketed to the richest of the rich, it is marketed to all different economic groups because this is a market and it has to be marketed to everyone. Now, numbers suggest that private universities will thrive. Of course, they'll be very, very successful in the upcoming years. Numbers suggest that people are doing less and less engineering degrees, MBA degrees, and more liberal arts degrees. Hence, a lot of universities are also infused to create new liberal studies and liberal arts departments. But bringing the conversation back to targeting private education and to whom we target this private education, again, the segmentalization of education that I was talking about entails that different economic groups are being targeted for degrees, courses, um, which kind of creates a surplus student population, a surplus student population to be parked. Mostly these student populations are also from low income groups. Um, and the problem exacerbates, right? But I would like to pull back from the private university conversation because, of course, it thrives, right? Sounds commonsensical, but it thrives because there is a strategic defund also of the public institutions, which is what I would like to bring the conversation briefly to. Again, there was a promise of spending 6% of our GDP on education, make higher education more accessible for people. Over the years, we have seen that we're not meeting that 6%. We'll probably never meet that 6%. We'll keep going lower on that number because we have to create that level playing field for the private universities to survive, right? For the private universities to thrive. Um, but what does this do to the citizens of India? What claims of accessible education can they make from the state, right? Uh, and this is an interesting question for me. And while I don't have answers, I think we have some numbers to substantiate what we could imagine for the future, right? So, of course, there's a hunky dory imagination that the government would like to sell us. Of course, the government sells us what is in its own benefit as the benefit of the people at large, right? So the state would say that, hey, we are providing mass education, we're providing education to all of India, but for them, it is also a profiting market, it's also a profiting sector, which will help the GDPs directly, sure, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, the other side of the spectrum is it's a little scary. Sure, private will thrive, but public will be made to fail because this is how it seems like it's going. Public is a place where anti-national students thrive, where there are constant student uprisings and protests and demonstrations. No studies happen there, of course, right? I'm being a little sarcastic, sorry. But yeah, so it will be made to fail. And this would lead to most of the people then opting for a private model of education, right? This would then mean that students would have to take loans of several lakhs to get into the education system. And mind you, these are people from all kinds of demography. These are not rich people taking loans to get into private universities. These are very poor people getting taking loans to get into the private universities because that is the only thing available to them. That is the only option available to them. That is the only thing being marketed to them, uh, almost push marketed to them too, right? So then what happens to the promise of accessible education? Like, what then becomes the role of the government vis-a-vis its citizens? Again, we were, uh, I think I'm almost out of my time, so I will just wrap up
No,
by
no, you
saying
have
that
you have another 8 to 10 minutes. Just
8 to 10 minutes. Oh
yeah,
wow,
sure, sure.
I don't have a lot to say in these 8 to 10 minutes. So I will
Doesn't
wrap up
matter.
anyway. Wonderful.
Be
Then that's
comfortable. Doesn't matter.
so then I want to imagine a future, right? A lot of people are doing amazing work looking at this problem in its current context, in its present condition, and trying to address them. But let's take an imagination of what this could mean for the future. We are going in many ways with the open credit system, this bouquet of courses that students can now take in universities, a very US-like model, right? But and this is our world data figures. In 2022, 48 million people, that's 10% of US population, had $1.6 trillion US dollars of student debt, right? Of course, Biden is now talking about how he wants to um, let go of some of these student loans, depending on who is from a lower income group, etc. But that's 10% of the population. This figure has doubled in the last 2 decades, right? Uh, I tried to hunt for representative figures in the Indian market. I wasn't able to yet, but I think it would be a brilliant study to understand what kind of loans have been taken from the banking system in the last years, what kind of stresses it puts on the banks. While that is not an innocent space at all, with its liaison with the government and with the private organization, and where does the citizen fit into all of this? Uh, Seemingly, the citizen is the one who failed, as in who has everything to lose in this schematic. Again, what does this mean for India in the next 10, 20 years? Uh, we know India to be an impoverished country too. So now that we imagine these private universities thriving and these public universities being strategically defunded, uh, what, what do we imagine India to be in the next years? So 5% of India lives under severe poverty, right? 15% of India lives under the poverty line. After the COVID-19 crisis and the economic downturn, 15 to 20% of India went under the poverty line again. That's one-fifth of our country's population, right? Again, one-fifth live very close to the poverty line. Again, we already know that the poverty line in India is really low. So that's almost two-fifths or three-fifths of the population of India living in precarious conditions today. Uh, and instead of promising them accessible education, accessible public education, accessible um, government regulated education, what we are doing is something tragic with them. And of course, we understand. I'm just talking about economic metrics, right? We would also imagine that there are other social intersections of marginality which would also intersect with these income data, right? There could be other ways of extrapolating and coming to the same idea that one, we are sooner or later getting into a student debt crisis, much to the tune that US is already seeing or already has seen in the past several years. And two, the situation is going to be worse off because of our very demography. Our demography is very different from what it is in the US, and the student loan crisis, which we are seeing in the future, which is impending, is going to be all the more tragic in a country like India. So coming back to the topic itself, uh, changing contours of higher education in globalized India. I think some of these contours are changing and changing very fast, and we are trying to do a damage control right now to see what we can save because of the horror that lies for us in the future. Um, and I hope academia, yes, but all other stakeholders um, in this idea of a civilization, India, statehood, I don't know, country, nation, um, kind of understand the seriousness of the issue we are putting us in and our future generations in. Thank you.
Thank you, Akash. Uh, you very rightly raised the question, or rather, you perhaps asked for definitions as to how and where we can equate the citizen and the customer. The customer who perforce becomes a consumer too. And with regard to the poverty line, with regard to GER, these are very important questions that I'm sure will definitely come back to us. There's just one trivia that I was remembering, Akash, when you were talking. I mean, this is something that I got to know just yesterday at a meeting at one of the elite private universities in Kolkata. It costs about 5 to 6 lakhs for a PhD degree. So, well, when you are the customer, when you are the consumer, you decide you want to consume a PhD for 5 lakhs or you want to consume a middle class car for 5 lakhs. The loan is always there. It's just that.
I will invite anyone who wants to do a bachelor's degree from my university. It's cheap. It's just 15
Yeah,
lakhs.
your
Thank
university
you.
is actually very reasonable. I do know.
Oh no, it's not. I was being sarcastic. It's 15 lakhs for a literature degree.
But
That's
I know, I
cutting.
know, I know. Okay, so thank you, Akash. Our next speaker is Swati Moitra from Gurudas College, Kolkata. Swati is assistant professor in the Department of English, Gurudas College, University of Calcutta, as I said. She's been a recipient of the Charles Scholars Fellowship and also was this 2022 Swati, the SHRP Research Development Grant.
It was 2022.
Right. So Swati speaks today on the world class university and its discontents, considering global university rankings. Swati?
Thank you so much, sir. And a very good morning. Well, it's noon now, to everybody present here. I'd like to start talking about a document published by the World Bank in 2011, which talks about, it's titled The Road to Academic Excellence, the Making of World Class Universities. And this particular document, it lays out the characteristics of a world-class university, where it lays out. It's a fantastic looking document. In fact, it talks about the concentration of talent. It talks about abundant resources. It talks about favorable government, and then it in fact picks up a bunch of case studies from various parts of the world, from Latin America to South Asia to East and Southeast Asia, the Republic of Korea, China, and even Africa. So, this is clearly a document that aspires to be global in every possible way by scanning the entirety of the globe, including nation states of the global south. In the India case, for instance, the World Bank document picks up the case study of IIT Bombay as a world class university to be, and talks about it's a piece written by an Indian scholar, and it talks about the branding of the IIT system as well as the potential of the same in the context of the world class universities. Now, this is something that I want us to remember, because as we speak of the global university rankings, it's this question: what is so global about the global university rankings that we really need to take into account? Because more often, very often, and I by no means am not exempt from this criticism that I'm leveling right now, that our conversations both about the NEP or the process of restructuring that the Indian education system has undergone for the last 3 decades or so, is this conversation is held mostly in a national context, which at times does not necessarily take into account the larger global currents at play. By discussing, bringing the World Bank's document, this is a 2011 document edited by Philip J. Oldback. This is something that I want us to keep an eye on. Now, on 15th July 2022, the last round of the NIRF, that's the National Institute Ranking Framework, the list was published by none other than the Honorable Minister of Education, Sri Dharmendra Pradhan. And as soon as he released it, so I was online that particular day, I didn't have anything to do. And I remember, because I was on Facebook and I follow a lot of newspapers on Facebook, so I could see that there was a breathless commentary on the NIRF rankings every 2 minutes, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, being posted, be it by the Indian Express or by the Anandabazar Putrika. I read newspapers in both languages, and I found that this was being covered in the same manner that you would cover, say, the EPL title league, for example, or the World Cup. It was given that same excitement. So the government of West Bengal, for instance, spoke of the success of its universities. The government of Tamil Nadu spoke of the success of its universities and praised it as a success of the Dravidian model. Whereas the newspapers in Kerala, such as the Manorama. I read it in English, so I don't really have access to the Malayalam language papers. Started talking about the slippage, the manner in which some Kerala universities have done well, what else Kerala needed to do, get into the elite list of the NIRF rankings, From there onwards, even as the newspaper commentary followed, and again, I had nothing to do. I was sitting on Facebook wasting my time. So this then followed commentary from people I know, and where again there were celebrations. So, for instance, alumni of Miranda House were celebrating the fact that their college was on the top 10 again. It was the ranked first for I think for the third or fourth consecutive year or something like that. So this was being celebrated. Jadavpur University, for instance, was celebrating a lot. And this, I think, is something that this begged the question that the NIRF as a structure was, of course, introduced in 2016. Does this mean that before the introduction of the NIRF, the Jadavpur University was not necessarily a good university in whatever sense that might be, or that Miranda House was not necessarily a good college, quote unquote, and that it required the validation of the ranking system for the alumni and the faculty and the newspapers to recognize the goodness of these so-called of these ostensibly good institutions, and that I think is a question about the global rankings that and that we must understand. Secondly, this is something that the newspapers did not address: is how does the NIRF rank these educational institutions in the first place? It's an addition, for example, of the number of papers published, etc. A certain metrics are available, which we don't really have the time to go into detail. So, but the question is, which arithmetical miracle produces uh, quality in a quantifiable numerical manner that allows you to say that yes, this university is better than that university, and so on. So, and yet that is precisely what these metrics promote, what they propose, and what they're clearly accepted and celebrated as something that allows you to quantify and justify the merits and the excellence of a particular institution and its ostensible world classness. So that is something about the ranking system and structure that we must take into account. But of course, at the same time, we must not necessarily blame ordinary citizens in this manner, because in this era of listicles, if movies can be listed as a top 10, that's how the logic follows. I'm not arguing in favor of this, but this is the dominant rationality, where if movies can be listed as top 10 and restaurants can be listed as top 10, therefore it follows that universities can also be listed as top 10, and that is where the whole discussion of rankings come from. And from there, of course, it's a product of a certain mode of neoliberal thinking, which, as Wendy Brown has argued, it is something that considers, that deems every institution, every aspect of our lives through the metrics of the market, and it is this market matrix alone that allows you a certain accounting process that determines questions of excellence and goodness. So therefore, perhaps it is not the ordinary citizen, when they replicate the celebration of this, of the NIRF ranking, it is coming from this neoliberal logic, which is now embedded in the minds of most citizens of this country. It's not really something, because that's something that we must take into account. uh, I hope I'm visible now. The thing was acting up. Anyway, to go back, uh, that's it's a certain kind of, the more an institution does well, the more visible it is, the more acceptable it is, and to become a part of that elite, then necessarily becomes a part of a prestige economy. In fact, Michelle Stack has called this a certain kind of political labor, where being a part of the best creates a certain sense of awe and joy and pleasure in you, which is exactly why you'll hear alumni say, "Oh, my institution has been the best," or faculty say, "Despite adversities, we have done so well." And who can blame them? After all, they have been. There are all sorts of adversities that we engage with all the time. So yes, it makes you feel good. But that really begs the question that where do the university rankings come from? Because universities have existed long since, for a very long time. But the rankings are necessarily not as old as the university structure itself. So it begs the question that where on earth did they come from? And why are they so popular all of a sudden? And okay, I'm disappearing again. You know what I'll do is I'll simply take away the visual effects. I think that's what is creating this issue. But at the same time, I'm not sure what to do with that. Anyway, but you can hear me, right? Even if I'm not necessarily.
Yeah. Yes, Swati.
Yes, 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 yes.
Just 1 minute, please. Let me fix this. I'll. Okay, no effect, no blur. So you'll now just have to deal with my horrid background. But anyway, to get back. Now, where does this ranking system come from? In 2003, the Xiaotong, and again, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, University in Shanghai started a ranking system in order to build a certain kind of competition between the universities of China. And this is early 2000s, note, and this is in China in its period of expansion of its soft power globally through institutions like the Confucius Institute, etc. And at this point of time, that China, as it was eager to both invest in public education as well as expand its global footprint, that China comes up. It's something that is produced for China. But of course, it's something that doesn't stay in China. In 2004, in a report submitted to the government, Sir Richard Lambert, who was incidentally both the former editor of Financial Times as well as a policymaker at the Bank of England, which is a fantastic combination, if you ask me. A journalist as well as somebody dealing with financial policy. He produced a report which says that the private sector needs to come up in order to produce a league table for universities, the same way that the English Premier League exists, in a league table where you can rank. Football clubs go up and down, and we say, "Oh, my club is not doing well," etc. So that sort of a thing. It's not something that he says that the government would do, but it was something that the private organizations were invited to do. And in this fantastic, we must notice this fantastic combination between the uh, media and policy, financial policy making, because this goes hand in hand. And we'll see the role that the media in particular plays in this process. Now, as answering his call, you have the on in you have in 2004 two huge companies come together to build what is called was then called the QSTHE ranking. So QS is the Quacquarelli Simon's organization, which was a career and placement services organization, and THE was the Times Higher Education magazine. They came together and then they started producing these rankings in the UK. Then after they had a breakup in 2009, the THE started publishing their own ranking, whereas the QS, again, they had their own ranking. Now, these three rankings, and we've all heard of them because they are the Xiaotong University one as well as these two are so powerful that in fact this year in last year in June, when the Honorable President of India met the vice chancellors and directors of various major institutions of this country, at that point of time, a guest the honored guest in this event was none other than the CEO of QS, Nanzio Coccarelli. And the Honorable President, in fact, he was very happy about the fact that 300 out of the top 300, six Indian universities had now come up in the ranks. It's like we had made the Premier League, so to speak. Now, what is even curious is that by 2013, the THE has been sold for 400 million pounds to a American private equity firm. And you might ask, what are private equity firms doing here? Like, why are they investing $400 million in what is basically ranking universities? Would you necessarily pay that much money to rank, top 10 cinemas that I've seen this year? But clearly, this kind of money is involved in this entire matter. In 2019, this was sold again for a lot of money. Why would say Thomson Reuters, which is a global media conglomerate, spend so much money behind these rankings? It's one of the major driving forces of the THE. Why would Elsevier, that already, which is again a mega scientific publishing organization, which now calls itself a analytics company as opposed to a publisher? If you go to their website, you will see it's mentioned there. So, why are they so interested in collecting data on ranking and then producing analysis of that ranking? What's really going on? And to understand that, we have to answer it's very simple that this university ranking system, like anything else, is also a major business. And the sheer amount of money that is generated here. So, on one hand, what it does, it's again a part of the where you take something that is uh, for a long time that was not uh, necessarily making a lot of money. You take it and you monetize it, and this is a part and parcel of the monetization of the university. So you collect data from the universities free of cost, then you quote unquote analyze that data according to your own metrics, and then you sell it back to the university saying, look, we'll tell you how to do better. So how will you do better? Well, let me sell you more software packages, etc., so that you know with your analytics information how to do better. This is a fantastic marketplace, really. And so, benchmarking tools, for instance, are sold in this manner, and the rankings are ever expanding. So, from the global rankings, you have Asia, you have Latin America rankings, you have BRICS and emerging economics ranking, and the media partners, Thomson Reuters, for example, is involved here. That's just one example. They spread this information comes to us like it came to me on Facebook on that particular day. You hear, oh, best, 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 and that's how this whole packaging makes sure that ordinary people also want to know that when we'll be a part of the best, because after all, who doesn't want to be the best? That is precisely what's at play in when it comes to this question of the ranking industry and that uh, demand for world classness. And in this age of globalization, there is no economy that is exempt from this demand, which has meant for a global restructuring of the university as it existed. So it is particularly difficult, say, for instance, the King Abdulaziz University in Saudi Arabia. It was alleged that they offered huge contracts to existing Nobel Prize winning faculty in the US or the UK or in developed countries, so that they would become a part of these universities in a visiting position, and the university could then show their citations, etc., to climb up the global rankings. This is something that has been well documented. For example, in India, too, a number of private universities have taken this route. For instance, to hire as visiting faculty a lot of highly established retired faculty, so that again their citations can become part and parcel of their university metrics. At the same time, the phenomenon of promoting very young professors to associate positions in order to highlight the fact that they have a number of associate professors is again yet another way of gaming that particular ranking system. Right. So, like many other countries, India has been working towards this path in 2000, at least 2011, when the Birla Ambani report on higher education was published, which promoted a certain model of higher education where it talks about deregulation and the promotion of a user pays policy for tertiary education. And the FICCI, for instance, had been arguing in favor of this for a long time now. There was other chambers of commerce. India offered, this is something that Akash Raha was talking about earlier, offered higher education as a part of the GATS offers, and not much is known about the status of that offer right now. It is curiously we remain silent about it, but that the offer was made is something that is well known. Following this, the NAC process has been made compulsory. Rather complex and debated proposals like graded autonomy has come into being. In 2016, the NRA framework came into being alongside another new regulation. This was called the UGC World Class Institutions Deemed to be Universities Regulations. In 2017, the World Class University Institutions word was taken out, and instead it was replaced by institutions of eminence. So, this is the language of the World Bank being reflected directly in the process of policy making, because the pressures of a globalized, restructured economy is something that shows in the very policies of a developing nation state like India. The whole agenda is that you pick some winners, some potential winners, and then you fast track their path to global world classness. And at the same time, what the NIRF does instead is the non world class ones, the ones that still have not quite become world class, they are encouraged to participate, to compete, so that this whole process of competition becomes naturalized. And all of us also say, so how do we do better in the NIRF? The same way, it's something that produces that, because after all, who doesn't want to be the best, right? So this whole process has to be understood in the context of these global currents. If we look at the paperwork, the policy documents, There is one particular phrase that should give us pause. And again, this is in continuation with what Akash was already talking about. This phrase is financial autonomy. For instance, in the case of the institutions of eminence, which was the world class institutions, uh, these organizations are to become, they're to get a corpus fund of 1,000 crores. But following this, they will have the freedom to raise money from wherever, spend it wherever, just not from public funds anymore. The 2016 TSR Subramanian Committee report is even clearer about this. It says very clearly that the best universities, accredited so in India from the NIRF rankings and such, will have complete financial economy or autonomy. So the excellence and financial autonomy goes hand in hand. This is what the Subramanian Committee report proposes. So what does, if on the other hand, if you do not perform well in the accreditation process, you will in fact be asked to shut down shop. What does that effectively mean? It means that there is a certain price that one must pay to become world class, and that price comes of course from out of the pocket or from loans. So because after all it is a question of user pays principle. Akash Bhattacharya earlier was talking about the national education policy, which explicitly mentions a question of need based economic support as opposed to the subsidized model that we have been familiar with for a very long time, which appears to recommend a model primarily of loans. Now, this is where the questions come into being, and I'll end with this, sir, here. I'll end with a set of questions, something that we must think about because this is an ongoing process that I don't necessarily have ready answers to. That given this restructured shift towards the need based method, need based policy, given this aspiration to be world class and the pressures both within, pressures created within the demand created through the existence of ranking systems like the NIRF, as well as increasing public familiarity with the QS, the THE, made possible through increasing media reportage. Given the demand, both internal and the external pressures to restructure, what happens to the question of equitable public education? What happens given the kind, again Akash Raha was talking about a certain loan crisis, and we have 2019 NBA data which suggests that NPAs, the the assets that have not returned, that NPAs in education loans currently stand at 9%, and that appears to be something that is rising. So this is a area that we must engage with, even as we sink into the euphoria of becoming world class and being the best. So that's all I'll have to say for now. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Swati. If I may sum up your questions, the most important and operative part of your deliberation, what you actually are saying and what we should all be asking is, where does the learner stand actually? The learner or the student, whatever nomenclatures we use, at a time when we are talking of globalizing education, we are talking of education as being the only weapon for a nation like ours. Where exactly does the learner stand? And when we say learner, we are actually talking across the spectrum. I mean, as you were speaking, I was just giving it a thought that this college, Chandrakona Mahavidyalaya, Vidyashankar Mahavidyalaya, that is organizing the much needed conference. Where do students who come to this college have the opportunity to think of rankings even, if we were to think of it in the larger context? So, therefore, this spectrum that all of you have been talking about, which is very, very different in case of India, which cannot really be, pitched at a so-called global level just like that, are obviously questions that will definitely keep recurring. Thank you, Swati, for that insightful deliberation. We now have Devaditto, Devaditto Bhattacharya. I understand it's pretty cold in Asansol, right, Devaditto? You have a shawl and there are cups of tea coming for you. We see.
Oh, but I'm in Chandrakona.
Oh, you're in Chandrakona. That's great.
Yes,
That's
I'm
even
in
great.
Yeah, so I made sure that I'm here. So this is the first blended environment that I'm part of, which I
Great.
absolutely hate from the deepest fiber of my being, but nonetheless.
Okay, so Devaditya will be talking today on demystifying the academic bank of credit, that is the one that's more commonly become the devil of ABC, or the platform economy in Indian higher education. Devaditya teaches literature at Kazi Nazrul University, Asansol. He has been working on a historical sociology of Indian universities mapped against questions of policy. He has recently completed a manuscript on the relationship between the public university and the meanings of its publicness, and is working on another on the histories and effects of the NEP 2020. Two of Devarito's edited anthologies on critical university studies include The Idea of the University, Histories and Contexts, and The University Unthought, Notes for a Future. Both of these are 2019 publications. So today Devarito is focusing on a very specific area of concern, which is the academic bank of credit. Devarito.
Thank you so much, Sridipta. And I mean, it's a pleasure to be in conversation with all of you. And I think the stage is already set for a part of what I'm going to actually talk about. Incidentally, as I said, that I'm part of this blended environment for the first time, and it feels really strange, right? And I want to register that strangeness because I made sure that I come to Chandrakona because I usually don't resort to online modes if there is the possibility of in-person presence, because I believe that the university is there for a purpose, and that purpose is the use of public infrastructures that the university affords. So I made sure that I come and occupy the space and inhabit the physicality of it, right? And there's a slight irony that I noticed, and which I want to kind of begin with as the as perhaps the biggest irony of globalization, which is that the college that is organizing this, Chandrakona Mahavidyalaya, and I came here, I entered the premises, and I was talking to a few students, and I realized that while a lot of these students are actually logged into sessions, most of them are not really cued into them, right? So because we are not really speaking in the language that they understand, right? So it is, so we are part of the site, we are part of a conference that this particular college is organizing, but we are somehow talking to each other and talking past the people who make this college, right? So we are talking beyond and apart from and irrespective of the people who actually inhabit the physical space of the college or the university. That's I think the biggest irony of globalization, that it enables, right, so as we all say, right, so a meeting place of the minds, irrespective of the people who actually inhabit those meeting places, right? So in terms of the placeness of the meeting. So I think, I mean, that's just something, I mean, and which is not to say anything about the people who have joined online. I think, I mean, there is a certain kind of logistical imagination of convenience that online modes actually provide us with, and that is what then kind of takes away from the physical brick and mortar structures of the university. And I do not think that the university is just a meeting place for minds. I think the university is the place, and the meeting can happen only as long as we use that place. Right. So I will just try, and I think, I mean, this is exactly the kind of point in the argument that I want to drive us towards, which is what is happening in this particular conjuncture of globalization is precisely a certain kind of abbreviation of the university. And I call it not just abbreviation, I call it an acronymization of the university, where the university becomes ABC, right? So it becomes a certain acronym. The university is hollowed out of itself. The university becomes a name, and not even a name, it becomes a sound. Right, so it becomes just a few sounds. Right, I call this the age of acronyms. Now, what happens with the acronym is that it transfers meaning from the level of the hermeneutic to the level of the pathetic, to the level of the phonetic, right? So it makes the sign into a sound and just a few pleasurable feel good sounds, right? And we are living in the age of acronyms. Who knows it better than us, right? So where we have PM cares and let's say Beam app, and so we are practically living in the policy age of acronyms where everything is right. I have a list of this is part of some work that I have been doing, so I can give you the entire kind of catalog of from Ujjwala to, let's say, to everything else, right? So that whatever Vidya, e-Vidya, and whatever, right? So that is what acronyms have done, and perhaps we are in an age where the university itself is about to become an acronym. Yeah, and that is what the ABC pretty much signals for us, where the university is no longer going to be the infrastructures that it affords, which is where the publicness of it lies, but the university is going to be precisely this kind of an acronym where we all log in using our own infrastructural access, right? So, and modes of access, and then we get a taste of the meeting of minds, right? So that is the irony of globalization. uh, Now, I'm sorry that I kind of, but I think, I mean, I'm going to be fairly scattered because I'm just going to talk through a few points that I've been thinking about, working on, etc. And I would hope that we can have certain conversations around these as we go along. Now, I want to begin by reading a certain kind of a certain excerpt from the National Education Policy, which is pretty much the gist of what the National Education Policy 2020 has to say about its own policy vision, its own vision for higher education. Right. So this is, I'm quoting from the policy. It says, the main thrust of this policy regarding higher education is to end the fragmentation of higher education by transforming higher education institutions into large multidisciplinary universities, colleges, and HEI clusters or knowledge hubs, each of which will aim to have 3,000 or more students. The ancient Indian universities, Takshashila, Nalanda, Vallabhi, and Vikramshila, which had thousands of students from India and the world studying in vibrant multidisciplinary environments, amply demonstrated the type of great success that large multidisciplinary research and teaching universities could bring. India urgently needs to bring back this great Indian tradition. Right, so Akash Bhattacharya has already spoken about this entire kind of imagination of bringing back and yet looking forward. Right, so that's again, that's one of the cardinal, let's say, paradoxes, and perhaps, right, so a very deliberate paradox on which the entire NEP 2020 document is hinged, which is about, right, so looking forward to the fourth industrial revolution and bringing back the Vedic golden age. Right, so India urgently needs to bring back this great Indian tradition to create well-rounded and innovative individuals, and which is already transforming other countries educationally and economically. Single stream HEIs, as in higher education institutions, will be phased out over time, and all will move towards becoming vibrant multidisciplinary institutions or parts of vibrant multidisciplinary HEI clusters in order to enable and encourage high quality multidisciplinary and cross disciplinary teaching and research across fields. The overall higher education sector will aim to be an integrated, very important word, right? So the overall higher education sector will aim to be an integrated higher education system, including professional and vocational education. This policy and its approach will be equally applicable to all HEIs across all current streams, which would, and I specifically want to italicize, like imaginatively italicize, right? So this part, right? So which would eventually merge into one coherent ecosystem of higher education. Eventually merge into one coherent ecosystem of higher education. I think that defines it all. And I want to kind of posit that this eventual merger into one coherent ecosystem of higher education is the age of the platform ecosystem. I think, and this is an argument that I'm trying to build, and I'm testing it for the first time with all of you, right? And therefore, what you think about my argument, I mean, if you want to rubbish it, that I absolutely wholeheartedly welcome it. Right? But my argument is that we've moved ahead of a market economy. It is not adequate anymore to look at higher education in India in terms of the market. A market presumes the existence of people, commodities, and places, right? So as Jane Gaia would put it, right? So, and of course, I mean, there can be different kinds of imaginations of people, commodities, and places, but nonetheless, I think the template of the market is not enough. It is inadequate to understand what is happening to yeah, exactly, financialization. But I yes, and I want to specifically kind of uh, make this part of a certain typology that I'm thinking through. I believe that we've moved from education as part of an imagination of welfare to education as part of an imagination of the market to education as part of what I call the platform. So, from the welfare to the market to the platform is what has happened to, let's say, the policy directions that education in India has seen. Now, what is this platform economy, or what is this platform ecosystem, right? So as we have already been told, merging into one integrated ecosystem of higher education. My argument is that this is the moment of the platform ecosystem, right? Now, and I think the biggest kind of shibboleth, the biggest, let's say, evidence of that one integrated ecosystem comes in the NEP 2020, and which, of course, has thereafter been brought out in the form of a set of regulations, which was published by the UGC in July 2021, and then subsequently amended in December 2021, which is called the Academic Bank of Credit Regulations. I think this one integrated ecosystem of higher education is the Academic Bank of Credit, and which will enable all of us to log into our wonderful super apps like the Geo app or Amazon's of higher education, right? So we will have our platform marketplaces, right? So through the ABC, we will have a super app, right? And in that super app, all that you are required to do is log in, and then you can distribute credits and verify credit awards, right? So at will through this kind of a as Swati put it, a speculative trading practice, right? So what is, so there are two kind of let's say I mean, two things that I'm positing. One is the platform ecosystem, and the other is the ABC, right? So as the external manifestation of the platform ecosystem in India. Now, what is this ABC? Now, clause 5.3, I'm doing some bit of citation because I just want to put it out there and then have us think about it. Now, clause 5.3 of the ABC regulations of 2021 defines the Academic Bank of Credits thus, right? And it says, Academic Bank of Credits shall be a bank for academic purposes on the pattern of commercial banks for financial purposes, with students as academic account holders, to whom the Academic Bank of Credits shall provide a variety of services, including credit verification, credit accumulation, credit transfer or redemption, and authentication of academic awards. So, and it goes on to then say that all that a student needs to do by registering on the ABC is only credit or only enroll in 50% of the total required course credits from the institution that one is physically registered in. The remaining 50% can be purchased from anywhere, because all institutions and all students are part of this one massive super app called the ABC, right? So it is the specific definition of what we understand in, let's say, economic terms, right? And this is part of a kind of economic anthropological discourse that I'm getting into. This is called the multi-sided market, right? So where you basically, the multi-sided market comes from the two-sided market, right? So the multi MSM is basically where you have, right? So network externalities, and the huger the next network externalities, which means the huger the number of participants on a platform, the more the business. So you have to basically go out and enroll all providers of services and all consumers of services on the same platform, and then give them an inordinate illusion of flexibility and control over their own life chances and their own career choices. So put them all together and then tell them, go out and design your own course. Do what you want. You have the world at your fingertips. So you have the entire logic of democracy being used to bring in what we call the platform, right? So the multi-sided market. So it is absolute democratization, right? So the hawa, the illusion of absolute democratization, right? So being used to bring in a heightened form of speculative trading, right? And which is exactly what platform ecosystems are all about. They use the logic of openness, sharing, commons, democracy, flexibility to subvert the substance of each of these concepts, right? And that is what we are currently rooted in. And I think, I mean, I'll just again quickly give you a certain idea of what I mean. And as I said, right, so there's going to be a deliberate curation of multiplicity, right? So, and which will then, so because a platform requires massive network externality, which means that more and more people external, or more and more agents external to the platform, must be brought to bear upon the platform, right? So must be made to log into the platform, and then they must be locked in. So there has to be a lock-in mechanism, right? So you lock in, right? So all the externalities that you can collect, right? So, and then tell them that go out and trade now, right? So do you have the world at your fingertips, as I said, right? So this is exactly then, right? So the super app model, and the super app model is obviously about the mega corporation. So it is a mega corporation, right? So which collaborates with the state, which will devise the super app, right? So which will come up with the super app, right? So the ABC, right? So it's not going to be the government's platform, right? So it is, of course, going to be floated by the government in collaboration with edtech, and we know which edtech, we know where all this edtech money will go, right? So it is a mega corporation. This is exactly how oligopolies work, right? So it is through mega corporations that you float a super app, get more and more people, and multiplicity, not just people, right? So get a liberating imagination of multiplicity into it, right? And then lock them all in. So how does this multiplicity work out? This multiplicity works out again, right, through what we are told, right, so is the multidisciplinary curriculum, right? So give them as many courses as you can, right? So, and float courses, which are, I have spoken about this everywhere because it just makes me go bonkers, right? So I think a lot of you would know Delhi University has rolled out the NEP vintage 4-year undergraduate program already, right? In the name of multidisciplinary education, the kind of skill enhancement courses and value addition courses that have been floated are courses like Art of Being Happy, Vedic Mathematics, Swachh Bharat, Ayurveda and Nutrition, Panchakosha, Holistic Development of Personality, Ethics and Values in Ancient Indian Tradition, Sahitya, Sanskrit, or Cinema. I don't know what that actually means, but clearly there is a course called Sahitya, Sanskrit, or Cinema. And it is not supposed to be Sanskriti or cinema, it is Sahitya, Sanskrit, or cinema. I don't know what is the relationship between Sanskrit and cinema, but perhaps, I mean, it is about Sanjay using, perhaps they might want us to believe that Sanjay was, right, so the first exhibitor of cinema, right, so insofar as he showed Kurukshetra to Dhritarashtra, right? So that was cinema viewing, right? So in those times, right? So then there are courses like Fit India. There are courses like Political Leadership and Communication. Again, a course which completely baffles me is called Harmonium, right? So this is a skill enhancement courses. I don't know what that means, but there is a course. It is not about the instrument harmonium, but it is definitely some kind of harmony, etc., whatever, right? So it is so this is multiplicity at its best. So you give them courses that anybody can register for, which requires no skill sets, which requires no prior training into the rigor of a discipline, right? And give them all that you can and then lock them in, right? And you have the platform, right? Now, I will end. I think I have, Sridipta, I have 1 more minute. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Or I'm done.
No, no, no. You have 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so 2 minutes. I think, I mean, Jane Gaia, I've already mentioned Jane Gaia, right? So she's done some terrific work on the platform economy, and she details 4 features, right? So what I extract from her work as the 4 features of the platform economy, I'll just kind of leave those 4 features for you to then think about, right? So and all these 4 features actually feature or figure within the NEP 2020 document, right? So as evidence of the platform ecosystem, the one integrated, coherent platform ecosystem that we are moving towards. Now, what are these 4 features that, according to Jane Gaia, are the let's say characteristic features of the platform ecosystem? Number one, right? So a desire for ultimate origins and distant horizons, right? And she goes on to explain it beautifully, where she says that there is a certain kind of a training into unconcern for the near future. You will be trained to not think about the near future, the immediately inhabitable future, right? And you will be trained into hankering for ultimate origins and distant horizons. That's the, and we know how it comes into the NEP 2020. The second is what she calls ordinality, right? So which is sequencing, right? So which is rating ranking, right? To put things in an order. And how does this ordinality work out? You will have a very steep top of the curve and an infinite tail to the curve. Right? So when 95% of the institutions must fall in that infinite tail. Right? So look at the graded autonomy model and you will see that is what comes up. Right? So that is exactly what comes up in front of us. Right? So 300 research universities of the type 1 sort and 10,000 colleges, right? So undergraduate degree granting colleges, right? So as type 3, right? So you have, and if you translate it, I mean, into percentages, right? So it comes to 2.4% of the institutions at the top and the rest, right? So which is like 97.6% of the institutions at the bottom, right? So that is called ordinality, right? And that is the other feature of a platform ecosystem. The third is the myth of a centum of 100%, right? So the myth, so the use of percentages, right? So the myth, and therefore this myth of an absolute wholeness, that there is 100 somewhere, right? So, and how do you manufacture that, right? So through statistics like enrollment ratios, right? So we have 26.3 out of 100 now, right? So we'll move it up to 50. So you have 100 somewhere. Project an illusion of the centum, right? So of 100. And the final is what she would, and my extrapolation of it would be, right? So a certain kind of price composition of the commodities through what? Not through products, but through derivatives. Give people derivatives, not products. Commodities are no longer important. Give people derivatives, which is precisely Fit India, Swachh Bharat, right? So the kind of order of multidisciplinary curriculum that is nothing but a logic of derivative education. So I will stop here. There's a lot more that I mean, as you can understand, right? I'm just really kind of into this at this point. So I hope we can talk more about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Devaditya. Yes, there is really much more I understand, and hopefully we will have scope for a little bit of that, much more of it. But the key issue that you raise obviously is, as you write in your abstract, how does this whole thing conceive the operations of, and you use very succinct terms, risk, uncertainty, debt, and mortgages in the valuation or the evaluation, whatever we call it, of credit. And at the cost of sounding almost blasphemous, there is one thing that I keep feeling when we talk of multidisciplinary HEIs. I mean, the immediate model that comes to my mind is that of moving from single screen cinemas to multiplexes. The question is really education or higher education being valued at anything more than that? And where does it ultimately take the learner, take the student in terms of quantifiable skill enhancement when it comes to proving one's credentials? So these obviously are questions that will continue to intrigue. But thank you for that very engaging presentation, Devalita. Our next speaker is Ankit Kawade from the Center of Political Studies, School of Social Sciences, JNU. Ankit, you are here, right?
Yeah, I'm here.
Right, Ankit is here. So Ankit's deliberation today is on caste, intellectual inequality, and higher education. And I would prefer to stress on each of these components because the first and the second actually translate to very serious ramifications for the third, which is higher education, as I understand, and definitely Ankit is going to talk of it. So Ankit is a PhD candidate at the Center for Political Studies, JNU. He is also the recipient of the Navayan Dalit History Fellowship, and his monograph titled The Genius of the Chandala and Gospel of the Superman, Nietzsche, Ambedkar, and the Conflict of Interpretations is forthcoming from Navayan. Ankit.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are perfectly
Yeah.
audible.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much, sir. Really happy to be a part of this conference. And although I'm not an expert or a scholar of education per se, I must say I've already learned a lot after listening to the presentations of my co-panelists. So let me begin my presentation with an anecdote, which I think speaks to the theme of this panel very well. So, in a discussion that happened sometime back in a public university, JNU, where I currently study, one person somewhat casually remarked that he has never heard of any cases of suicides in Indian private universities. So, it was not the factual incorrectness of this opinion that surprised me, given that some private universities in India have indeed reported cases of student suicides, but the justificatory or congratulatory tone with which this person seemed to appreciate private universities for not leaving its students in such harrowing circumstances that they decide to end their lives. Given that this opinion was uttered immediately in response to a point about Rohit Vemula's institutional murder at the Hyderabad Central University, I think that this opinion about student suicides was really useful or instructive to think about certain broader and perhaps even systemic changes happening in the higher education sector in India, especially in the post globalization period. So, to refer back to this statement about there being nearly no cases of student suicides in private universities, it appears that the person was implying, hypothetically and perhaps rather insensitively as well, that since the majority of student suicides occur in public universities and colleges, private universities are somehow safer or less dangerous for the physical and mental well being of its students. A less charitable interpretation of this opinion would suggest that the person was implying that had Rohit Vemula been in a private university, he would not have been subject to the caste discrimination and harassment that ultimately resulted in his death. So, in the course of this discussion, another case of a student suicide was also mentioned, namely that of Aishwarya Reddy, an undergraduate student of the Lady Shri Ram College for Women in New Delhi, which, even if it is known as an elite college, is still not a private but a public institution which receives state funds and implements reservations and so on. So, saying that public universities and colleges are especially susceptible towards seeing more student suicides, even if it contains a grain of truth, certainly hides something. It hides the material conditions of the post liberalization and post globalization higher education sector, as it is called, which is characterized by an exponential rise in the number of private universities of higher learning in India and the simultaneous dilapidation of existing public institutions of higher education. More importantly, in its seemingly benign concern for student suicides in India, such an opinion forgets that students like Rohit and Aishwarya, both of whom were first generation learners, would have found it to be increasingly difficult, if not totally impossible, to gain admission to such private universities or colleges due to their unaffordable and exorbitant fees. Thus, when someone congratulates private universities for reporting no student suicides, they are in effect showcasing that these universities would not even admit such students whose material conditions would force them to take their own lives. Students like Rohit and Aishwarya. So, having highlighted some of the implications of this statement regarding private and public institutions of higher education, something that we've been, discussing throughout this panel, let me move on to the main theme of my presentation, which is caste and intellectual inequality. The theme of caste and intellectual inequality is connected to this previous discussion about student suicides because cases of suicide, in my opinion, are nothing if not tragic pointers of the specific model of inclusion that is practiced in Indian higher education institutions, mostly public, public universities. So, such a model can be called the entry model of inclusion, where a marginalized student may be given entry to the university, but they may not be guaranteed a hostel for residence or a scholarship for everyday sustenance, where a marginalized student may be given an entry into the classroom, but may not be guaranteed a space of egalitarian interactions with one's peers and teachers. Since inclusion is not conceived here as a continuous process, but as an event which can be measured by citing official statistics about the number of marginalized students admitted into an institution every year, it would not be surprising if dropout rates are also significantly higher in public universities and colleges as compared to private ones. Because the material conditions that propel a student to drop out from a degree program are more likely to be absent from the lives of students attending private institutions of higher learning. We've already talked about the bungling of numbers and statistics in the previous presentations. So, two key and interrelated developments related to caste and higher education in the post 1990s period or in the post globalization period have been the heightened physical presence of Dalit students and faculty in higher education institutions in India, as well as the heightened intellectual presence of topics broadly falling under the ambit of Dalit studies and anti caste thought in university syllabi and teaching modules. These developments have been clearly facilitated by the policies of caste based affirmative action in India, with Dalit faculty and students demanding and enacting the inclusion of Ambedkar and other anti caste thinkers in university syllabi and politics, respectively. Another parallel but interlinked development related to caste and higher education are the burgeoning number of private institutions of higher learning that have now cropped up in several metropolitan centers of the country like Delhi, NCR, Chennai, Pune, Calcutta, Bangalore, etc. This development is in sync with the dilapidation of public institutions of learning by starving them of funds, which results in higher fees for students and contractual or precarious work for teachers in these institutions. Now, the question before us really is, how have these relatively new developments of, say, privatization and contractualization interacted with a phenomena which is of a deeply entrenched historical origin in India, namely the phenomenon of intellectual inequality? So, what I mean by intellectual inequality is the whole range of effects generated from the exclusive or monopolistic rights over the means of reading, writing, and thinking that has been historically enjoyed by one particular class in Indian society. More focused discussion about this concept of intellectual inequality has happened by comparing it to the division between what is called mental as opposed to manual labor. And this division is useful for analytical purposes in the context of India as well. So the phenomenon of intellectual inequality, at least since the establishment of modern institutions of higher learning in colonial India, has had a rather symmetrical relation with caste divisions, where, for instance, the Brahmins' claim of superiority primarily owed its discursive and religious origins to their exclusive or monopolistic right over reading and teaching the Vedas. This exclusive right can also be interpreted in terms of the gendered concession to mostly Brahmin men of never having to engage with what is termed as manual work. So, to give an example from colonial India, when the children belonging to castes mostly engaged in manual work began to join the schools established by the British in Western India, Bal Gangadhar Tilak made the following remark, which illustrates the phenomenon of intellectual inequality and the mental manual division very well. So, this is a quote from him. He said, "You take away a farmer's boy from the plough, the blacksmith's boy from the bellows, and the cobbler's boy from his awl with the object of giving him liberal education. And the boy learns to condemn the profession of his father, not to speak of the loss to which the latter is put by being deprived of the son's assistance at the old trade." End of quote. So Tilak was here only concerned about the ancestral loss of occupations of Bahujan castes. However, he was not at all concerned about whether the upper castes would be able to accommodate or assimilate to the new system of education that has come up, and whether they would be able to continue their ancestral occupations or not. So, especially because English education was as much a novelty for the upper castes as it was for the other castes in Western India. The relative seamlessness with which the top layer of Western India accustomed themselves to the colonial and post-colonial institutions of higher learning is only an outcome of the entrenched phenomenon of intellectual inequality, which turns the historical privileges around exclusive rights to read and write into a belief about one's inherent superiority in certain domains of human activity, as if this quality is magically granted by being born in a higher caste. Now, what are some concrete ways in which the phenomenon of intellectual inequality manifest in our higher education institutions? So, just as an experiment, one can take the curricula or syllabi prescribed in the subjects of social sciences in one's university and try to find out how many of these courses teach the primary and secondary literature associated with the anti-caste movement in India. By all means, it can be said that the long tradition of anti caste thinking found in the Indian subcontinent is still quite scandalously overlooked in the curricula or syllabi of higher education institutions in India and in the works of scholarship on South Asia. Soumyabrat Chaudhary, a professor at JNU, describes this conundrum very well when he speaks of a resentful toleration or even glorification of Ambedkar while neglecting the moral and political substance of his thought in Indian universities. So, this is a quote from him. He writes, "Very few today dare deny Ambedkar's originality or his erudition. However, only a small section of the professors of sociology teach castes in India, their mechanism, genesis, and development. This is a paper written by Dr. Ambedkar, and hardly any professional historian is caught discussing who were the Shudras as a historiographical intervention." Another book that was written by Dr. Ambedkar. So one can similarly check if these texts are taught in the sociology and history departments of one's university or not. Um, so, as an implication, what exists or is absent from one's syllabus also affects what might be called the speech or voice distribution within the classroom. That is, who gets to speak in a classroom and who remains mostly silent. I'm sure there are so many teachers here, and all of us must have, encountered this problem about a section of the students perennially remaining silent in the classroom. So here I would like to cite another example that I witnessed during the course of my BA degree. So my undergraduate sociology teacher in Ferguson College, Pune, while teaching the foundation course on Indian society, would make it a point to include the English translations of Dalit autobiographies like Om Prakash Valmiki's Jhutan and Urmila Pawar's Ayadan to critically discuss caste along with the usual scholars prescribed in such courses like G.S. Ghurye and M.N. Srinivas. Without uttering the words multidisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity, she was, already practicing teaching a literary text in a sociology class. So we noticed that students who usually hesitated to speak or mostly remained silent in the classroom actively participated in the classroom discussions, especially when Dalit autobiographies and the everyday experience of caste injustices were under discussion. More importantly, students who customarily spoke the most during classroom discussions, and it's to no one's guess what social profile these students would be belonging to. These students went unusually silent or quiet when Dalit autobiographies were discussed in the classroom. And what was an initially highly unjust and unequal distribution of voices or speech in the classroom gradually became a more equitable one as we moved into the second and the third year of our graduation. So I think what we can learn from this instance is the extent to which the potentials of the physical presence of Dalit students in the classroom is undercut by a pedagogical ignorance or indifference practiced towards what might broadly be called as Dalit studies. That is, all such critical inquiries that interrogate the subordinate position of Dalits in Indian society. By all means, I think this situation is only going to get worse. But I also think that this pedagogical ignorance predates the rampant privatization of education in India. So this practiced apathy towards Dalit literature and Dalit thought is a major example of maintaining the status quo of intellectual inequality in the classroom spaces, through which a potentially egalitarian space of the classroom is made less hospitable for the intellectual interventions of Dalit students. Um, However, another facet of this problem, and this is where I think we are getting into the extremely contemporary problems faced due to the whole phenomenon of privatization, is where one finds Ambedkar and or Dalit autobiographies being taught by certain conscientious and progressive faculty members in the classrooms of elite private universities, which have a negligible or next to no physical presence or representation of Dalit students. So this is exactly the kind of new academic infrastructure that is also endorsed by the NEP, where there will be, mostly private universities in India where there might exist a select bunch of well-meaning faculty and students who might at best think about Dalits owing to a greater availability of the archives of Dalit art, literature, politics, and even personal testimonies. But this new infrastructure nonetheless cannot fulfill the ethical prerogative of thinking with the Dalit, which requires an egalitarian classroom as its initial condition. So this is basically akin to a problem about this is basically akin to the problem of discussing everything about caste and the problems of Dalits without having a single Dalit student in your classroom. And I can only think about the ethical implications of such a situation in so many private universities that have already opened up in our country. So, so I'll conclude with this last bit where I want to raise this question about why do certain private universities in India find it easier to teach Ambedkar in the classroom, or perhaps hire a handful of conscientious Dalit faculty members through merit, of course, but find it impossible to formally implement an affirmative action program for Dalit students and faculty in their institutions, as is already followed by public institutions in our country. An answer to this question might yield a clue not only to the social character of higher education institutions in our post-globalization era, which are being, summarily endorsed by the new kinds of policies that the current government is implementing, but it might also reveal the skewed understandings of social justice. So, for instance, the kind of assistance programs that these new universities are speaking about. So, the need-based assistance, or say merit-based assistance, in the name of social justice, or in the name of catering to the ones who are underprivileged. Um, such kinds of deliberations, I think, would also reveal the limits of such kinds of interventions, which, to my mind, only amplify the intellectual inequality between Dalits and non-Dalits. Um, so, lastly, it might also give us an explanation for the opinion that I cited at the beginning of my presentation about why some people in India have begun to think that if only we were to open more private universities, which do not, in their opinion, see as much hostile state interference as public universities, we would somehow see an end of student suicides, or we would somehow see an end in the harassment of students. So I'll end there. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Ankit. Uh, you were basically problematizing, as I understand, the question of whether the interest in Dalit anthropology is more academic in nature, that is, I put academic within quotes, than rather being the reality of lived experience, which is where obviously the very recurrent debate between, as Dalit literary aesthetics puts it, between Anuman and Anubhav do come in. So, but then, there is one thing that I was feeling as you were talking. This is just to share with you. That is, I mean, in public university spaces, and if I extend public university spaces to mean in if I dare say, in governmental India at a very broad level, aren't the issues still there as well? I mean, in your own city, that is in Delhi, I mean, not Pune, we were astounded as to see what happened just 3 months back. And if I may make an overtly political statement from history, obviously from contemporary history, the sacking of the minister. I mean, why does it have to happen? And these are basically areas that I find repeatedly the answers perhaps lie getting beyond theory into a very realistic understanding of what Baba has very succinctly called the third space of enunciation, which is perhaps still lacking. That dialogue is still lacking. So that way, definitely, yes. But then, in terms of the new education policy, in terms of education in a globalized society, in terms of knowledge societies, turning a blinker to this very important aspect of sociology is definitely a challenge, which perhaps NEP or no NEP remains an issue that needs to be addressed by conscientious, not just by conscientious academics, but by conscientious society at large, I would say. So thank you, Ankit. That was really fascinating. And we definitely come back for more, I'm sure. Our last speaker for this session is Salim Mir. Salim, you're there, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Right.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're perfectly audible. So just
Okay.
give me a minute to introduce you, Salim, because
Yes,
rightly your presentation comes at the end where you perhaps will be problematizing. We have so long been talking about the ends, but then you are problematizing the means, because Salim is going to talk on technological innovations in education, a critical engagement with the challenge in the Indian context. And Salim currently teaches at the Cluster Innovation Center, University of Delhi. And prior to this, he has worked at the School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi. He's been visiting faculty at Dayal Singh College, DU. Mir has an MSc in Geography from Aligarh Muslim University, and his MPhil PhD are from the Delhi School of Economics. He has a master's degree in tourism management. Apart from heritage tourism, Mir also teaches courses on technology and society and digital humanities. So his research interests broadly are digital humanities, technology and society, virtual worlds, geography of innovations, and travel and tourism. Mir, therefore, is the last speaker for this session, and we look forward to you for the ways in which you problematize technology and the rest of it together. Mir.
thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I was trying to share my presentation, but I think there is some issue with that. So maybe I will just go ahead without sharing it. So, uh,
Isn't it working?
my
Isn't
topic
the
as
present now option working, Mir? It should work.
it's not working.
Give it a try, and if it doesn't, finally, then we'll hear you out.
Okay, I'm trying again. So there is can't share your screen. So, anyways, I think it's okay.
Okay.
So, no problem. All the danger that India might be facing. I mean, in future, if we are allowing that such ed tech innovations to method of education that differs from the established practice. is used to increase the level of efficiency in a competitive environment. So these include pedagogical innovation, scientific and methodological innovations, and educational and technological innovations. Technological innovations have always intervened in the education sector, mostly in positive manner. But the digital innovations of the present times seem to disrupt the traditional established mode and model of education. Such interventions are changing the basic concepts of place of learning and the importance of the teacher as the teaching is migrated to the digital platforms. It's, I suppose, necessary to trace a brief history of this mode of learning and teaching. In 1728, there was an advertisement in Boston Gazette proposing to teach shorthand to students. Systems post with a to offer college courses for credit. Of a rise in online programs when New York University unveiled NYU Online, along with many of the other online programs that
Is Mir having network issues?
Looks like it. I can't hear him at all.
Looks like it. I'll just give
Maybe he
him a
can
call and
relog.
I'll check. Right, right. I'll just check.
the future seems to encourage the online knowledge delivery system. So we will have to witness more and more educational institutions migrating to online digital mode. It is thus imperative for researchers to understand the impacts of such disruptive technological innovations for the stakeholders like students and teachers and government and the society at large. My paper is just an attempt to explore the impacts that such edtech innovations will have on the concepts of education and teacher and what impact it will have on the platform society. So we are living in a network society or platform society. This network society is the expression that was coined in 1991 and is related to the social, political, economic, and cultural changes caused by the spread of networked digital information and communications technology. One part of network society is the use of digital platforms to organize economic systems like Uber, Amazon. We know all of many of such platforms, as well as traditional state responsibilities like healthcare and education. In many contexts, the platform society is considered as something good, bottom up organization of society rather than top down government. It can be synonymous with efficiency as well as openness and democracy since everyone is said to be connected. But what does the use of learning platforms and other kinds of commercial edtech do to the policies, pedagogies, and practices of education? Researches showed how the digitalization and datafication of education have changed the cultural and pedagogical norms for education. The platforms also mobilize commercial companies into the education system. So regarding the engagement of business actors in education, a techno business culture is given priority over an educational or pedagogical one. In such a system, the student becomes a user whose engagement is defined by individual needs and desires. EdTech companies view education as a personalized business. The transforming of business ideals into education is also made possible by constructing educational institutions' need for help from the business sector. The learning platforms, software, hardware, and professional development regarding digitalization are the commodities that have the power to change the very idea of teaching. So the digitalization of education is deeply entangled with the rise of business sector. The edtech companies engage in teacher training, they engage in certification, and the discursive figuration of teacher also risks the producing an education system that is built in on business ideals rather than democratic fundamentals that it actually claims. School is how Google displays its the event in 9 the messages come limited to a specific place, but could and of disconnecting education from a place also characterizes how the edupreneurs talk about both realities and visions of schools and colleges and universities, the buildings that are flexible but for an unknown future. As they were said, that there is unknown future that we are talking about. We are not talking about the immediate future or the present. What we can agree on is that in a digitalized institute, learning takes place beyond time and space. If you teach in a traditional way, like we are doing as now, then the classroom is perfect. But if you teach in modern way, the modern way, then it just becomes an obstacle for you, the same classroom. But even better, formal education does not have to take place in a specific building called a school or college or university. It can be located in other areas such as hotels, streets, coffee shops, or your homes. The place of learning is no more a common place, but is individually distributed. The place is no longer important in the dream of digitalized classrooms. The distance and closeness are supposed to overcome through technology. Going to school or going to college or university is not about a physical space anymore. It's a dream, about learning from potential, from personal motivation and abilities rather than being a part of a physical and intellectual collective. That is a problem. Then there is this anytime or all the time, learning for the future, and that means time has lost its essence. So, besides changing space, digitalization gives rise to the concept of the timeless time, which is characterized by future, by speed, and by volatility. And regarding volatility, what edupreneurs still talk about is that there is the need for students to collaborate through working at the same time. There are also opposite or parallel ideas of more flexible times to meet the students' needs as well as future globalized society's needs for a flexible workforce. Besides the idea of time as floating rather than static, timeless time is about focusing on the future rather than the present or the past. And that to a distant future, which we are not envisaging yet. Through the entrepreneurial discourse, the future is made up of something that educational institutions and their teachers need to catch up with, since society is talked about as changing at high speed. So, to catch up with the changes, institutions, teaching, and teachers are said to need to change fundamentally, which also makes them administrable and possible to stare as unfinished beings. And this can lead to end of a teacher as we know it. So that's an important question for all of us. That is the platformization or digitalization of education the start of the end of the teacher as we know it. The figuration of the desirable teacher made up by the edupreneurs is a teacher who is absolutely present and who is coaching, not lecturing, who is flexible, who is willing to speed up and ready to work whenever and wherever. And the most obvious characteristic in the teacher figuration is the coach, the teacher who customizes his or her work to the individual student and his or her needs of knowledge, location, and time frames, emphasizing that education is not a collective activity but a personal business. The commercialization and digitalization of education also affects teachers' daily work. They risk becoming reduced to coaches, facilitators, and data analysts if they are needed at all. And the trust then could be put in data rather than in teachers' professional knowledge. So this is about how edtech innovations are kind of changing fundamental concepts in teaching learning process. Now, my second section is about the condition in India, the edtech boom here that we are seeing. So regarding edtech innovations, currently India is the leading country with the highest number of startups, edtech startups, followed by USA and Europe. From just $247 million market in and 1.6 million users in 2016, India's edtech market was estimated to grow to 1.96 billion and 9.6 million users in 2022. And by 2025, it will reach to $10 billion with 37 million paid edtech users only in India. India has surpassed China, Europe, as well as USA in terms of edtech innovations, and this boom is associated with an enormous leap in the growth of the middle class in India and the availability of the mobile devices and internet access. And we can consider COVID-19 as a factor as well. But the main factor that I think is kind of steering this edtech boom is that there is this governments or kind of we can say public education system is there is a lacuna in public education system which these edtech companies are trying to fill, that we can see in coaching centers also trying to fill the gap that government is not able to kind of provide in the institution that it was supposed to. So there are thousands of edtech startups in India as of 2022 as per estimates. Although many startups and businesses are still in stages of development and growth, the environment is overall very friendly for these companies and has a strong position to attract further investment in the future. So the gap between the educational facilities, as I said earlier, and the academic resources is being filled by these technological projects. But the challenge is, for example, we say that okay, we are going to, as we can see, that MOOCs and all is having an important place in this NEP and all. We're trying to go have a blended mode and academic credit points, as they were said already. So all these kind of, you can get credits from anywhere in the world. So it's basically trying to globalize the education in a real way, that there is no boundary between between a university in India or anywhere in the world. So you can get credit from anywhere, from online platforms like Coursera or any other platform, and get your degree. You don't have to be present in the university which you are enrolled in for a long, for a large period of time. Like you can go anywhere. So you can go online. Online is what actually we are trying to give the opportunities to the students, to the community at large. But the problem in India, the challenges in India are actually, there are many challenges, and we have the lack of stable connectivity and accessibility. The prerequisite of being familiar with technology, then the regional disparity, gender differences, we have socioeconomic factors, we have, as we were talking, caste factors, we have all these, which leave a large portion of society, large portion of our students out of the educational system. So it hampers this learning, and the quality of experience that others, their peers are having. So online medium of education significantly, undoes schools' long and difficult attempts as platforms to blur the inequalities among students belonging to different sections of society. In fact, we have seen that they're having these differences. This gap has increased with the online systems that we saw in COVID lockdowns. So we have the digital divide that exists at learners as well as the teachers level, not only in India, but it is the phenomenon that is across the globe. The extent of this gap varies from region and region, depending upon the infrastructure, the socioeconomic background of stakeholders, especially students, and many other local factors like particular culture, the caste, the community that you are from. socioeconomic inequalities in the physical world have become more pronounced actually in digital world. So I was supposed to show it on the through the through my presentation, but I'll say this some of the figures that I have here. So the scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, and general population, their internet access. Okay, if we see that scheduled tribes internet access as per the 2008 NSSO data is 10.7%, and computer access is only for 4% of the students. For scheduled caste, it is 14% and 4% computer access. But for general population, for general students, for unreserved, we can say it's 35%, and computer access is for 16%. So there you can see the gap of almost 25% between the scheduled tribes and the general. No, it's in the school, and in colleges the gap is like, for general students it's like 39 or about 40% have internet access, and 20% have computer access. But among the scheduled tribe and scheduled caste students, it's only 12 to 13% internet access, and just 4 to 5 to 6% computer access. So we can see the gap between the different communities that we are having in India. Then internet penetration is also a problem here. So access to digital platforms is primarily determined by factors like availability of reliable electricity, access to internet devices, and high-speed internet. India's internet penetration still hovers around 55%, with one of the slowest internet speeds in the world, which is a significant hurdle, considering that most of the educational material consists of online lectures and need kind of huge space, as well as the data transfer bandwidth. So here again we can see, there we have households according to 2018 only survey of NSSO. We have, it's claimed that we have 55% internet penetration, but according to the data, we only 1.4%, a gap of around 20% between rural and urban areas. Connectivity internet facility in rural areas, it is just 15%, and in urban areas it goes to 42%. So according to this data, the internet penetration is just 24%, not the 55% that we are thinking that it is there. So the total number of users does not always equate to the number of internet devices, as this NSSO survey has showed that only 24% of households have internet facilities, and only 11% possess any type of computer. Then we have highly unreliable electricity, with outages lasting hours in rural areas, and it often leaves out the last mile consumers that we have in far and inaccessible areas. So there was this survey by Ministry of Rural Development in 2019. It showed that 50% of households had access to electricity. Less than 50% of households had access to electricity for more than 12 hours a day. That means we have electricity shortage also. That is a hurdle that can be there. Another barrier that we have specific to India, we can say, is the language barrier. So more than 90% of the content on online learning platforms is in English, and consequently it fails to cater the linguistically diverse audience in India. It remains accessible only to a specific section of population, while a large section of learners cannot make use of it. The National Achievements Survey of by NCRT shows that almost 50% of Indian school kids don't have basic reading proficiency in their mother tongue. Navigating, therefore, in an arena where English is the dominant medium proves to be a big challenge. While societal practices and culture cannot be transformed overnight, the nascent stage of the basic infrastructure that we have in India, it aggravates the problems of especially the first generation learners. And in case of online education, the assumed ability to navigate the internet and tech devices and the reading material in an unfamiliar language will significantly inhibit learners' motivation. Then we have the challenges in kind of achieving gender equity, which I will not go deeper into. But yeah, there is this policy conundrum as we are talking about NEP, and where we have had earlier education policies. So globally, what is happening that several online courses can be credited to regular college programs on a one-to-one basis partnership between the service providers and the institutions. And such a mechanism does not exist in India, which impedes the end goal of the online learning process. There are examples from the world over which show that online education offers excellent promise for upskilling as well as making education reach the masses, provided sufficient state policy exists to guide them. But the state in India notably lacks both the imagination and on the same, causing the absence of any notable contribution to the discussion of regional disparity in terms of language or access to quality education and the infrastructural impediments and some other kind of obstacles that we are having in the inaccessible areas. Of course, internet was the internet in 1986 was a rudimentary system, and hence it was not exactly envisioned as a key to the solution to the educational in the then educational policy. The current NEP of 2020 puts immense faith in MOOCs and sees them as a fast solution to tackle roadblocks on the path to basic literary, basic education and literacy and skill development, despite the vast disparity that exists in terms of access to the online platforms, online education in India. So my final comments basically are that technological innovations cannot be stopped. We cannot do that. I mean, it's like going to happen. We never are able to stop innovations. The platformization of education is not the panache for the dismal performance of traditional education which our government is trying to kind of show us that educational, going online, using MOOCs and all will help us kind of change the earlier dismal performance that our education system is having. So researchers have shown that access to online learning is hindered by the same underlying causes as is the case with the in-classroom education. That is lack of awareness, then time constraints, financial issues, socio-cultural factors. Although we have challenges of digital divide, internet penetration, ICT infrastructure, etc., these challenges can be addressed through proper policy and planning in due course of time. But the question, I would like to raise is: should digital online education be allowed to encroach and dominate the established models? And if yes, then how should edtech companies be regulated? So these are the questions that I kind of wonder: how are these going to be regulated, and should we allow them to kind of dominate the educational sector that we have in India? Because that is what it seems that's going to happen in near future. And allowing edtech and online platforms means privatization at a large scale. So are we ready for that? Is India ready for that? Will it be feasible for any country like India ever to allow that? So that's my question. And with this note, I want to wind up my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim. Yes, very relevant questions as Swati has commented, because you are actually hinging on the paradox. There's no stopping technology, nor is anybody talking in terms of, a recession of technology. But the point is, how does one apply the technology and to what effect are we looking at it? Because you have pointed at both aspects of this technology boom in education, if I may. One, you've talked of the changing perspective of the teacher, where the teacher is conceived more as a facilitator, a data analyst, while the NEP in its very preamble stresses on the importance of the teacher in the entire system. And the other aspect that you have mentioned, which every one of us in whatever kind of institutions we might be teaching or researching does have to confront, which is the issue of how do we prevent technology from increasing the gap. The question of and egalitarian approach in terms of accessibility is what I mean. Accessibility of different kinds, which are governed by factors that are not necessarily intrinsic only into the education scenario, but in the entire input system with which a society works, a country works. So, very relevant questions. Thank you for that presentation. Samana, can we extend by say 5 minutes and have a 10-minute window for discussions? I guess, because I'm sure there would be a lot of things to talk about.
Yes, I am really sorry, but the thing is that because of technological
Mhm.
limitation, we have to stop exactly at, like 153
Okay,
or
okay, okay,
154 because the next stream starts at 155, right?
okay. So
Okay. So everyone has to be very
we
brief.
will.
And maybe we all can meet
Yeah,
again
sure.
for an elaborate
Okay, okay,
discussion.
okay. No, Samana, what we'll do is we'll agree to finish off by 150 to
All right.
ultimately put a human edge to technology.
Thank you.
So let's just quickly go through questions or comments that might have come in. Uh, the first question is from Swati. This is for whom is it, Swati? Devaditya. Devaditya, you have the
Yeah,
question.
it's from. Yeah. So I'll just quickly try and understand so that there's space for more questions and more people get to talk. So, so yes, Swati, absolutely bang on, and I think that is the primary point at one of the primary points at stake here. I do look at the question of labor, and of course, I mean, there's a certain kind of there's a conceptual formulation that I make about the derivatives market, right? So, and how or what a derivatives market, right? So, or the platform age, which is basically about derivative, right? So, which is basically about this kind of proliferation of a derivatives market, right? So, what it does to the question of value, right? So, and the generation of value, right? So insofar as so looking at the labor theory of value, right? So through the question of the derivatives and how, right? So what does let's say the kind of risk management instruments which are factored into the pricing of derivatives, right? So derivatives are basically priced through a factoring in of risk, right? So, and risk management instruments, therefore, how to control risks. So, what does it do to the basic understanding of labor and the generation of value through labor? Right, so that is a larger philosophical formulation that I make, and that is but I'm not getting into it right now. But to also talk of it in pure policy terms, right? So I think it's absolutely important to look at how contractualization is the mainstay of edtech, right? And if we look at so it is not because of the pandemic that online teaching came in or edtech came into India, right? So in fact, it was a 2016 set of regulations called the Credit Framework for Online Learning Courses Regulations, which proposed the institution of MOOCs, and which said that MOOCs have to be brought into the Indian higher education sector in order to make up for the lack of teaching labor, right? So that is where it all comes in. So online education becomes, right, so declaredly as early as 2016, just when the MOOC bubble bursts in the US, right? So in the US, the MOOC, it is believed that the MOOC period happened between 2011 and 2016, right? And just when it bursts in the US, it comes to us, and we are told in UGC regulations, right, so that in order to compensate for the lack of teaching labor, we have to institute massive online open courses. So I think, the labor question is integrally related to the question of edtech, and I can have longer discussions with you on that.
Thank you, Devaditya. Any further questions or comments on any of the presentations? No?
Sir, I would like to briefly respond to one of the
Yes,
questions that
please.
you had
Please go
raised.
ahead. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
So I absolutely agree with you that the kind of problem that I raised predates the whole privatization problem that we are, currently facing in higher education. At the same time, I feel we still need to make that sort of a normative distinction between a public university and a private university. So recently there's a lot of buzz around a lot of Dalit students going abroad to do their masters and PhDs in foreign universities, and a lot of organizations, a lot of campaigns are also being set up to send more and more Dalit students abroad for their higher education. um, so here a lot of the students who could not even who got accepted but could not even access loans resorted to crowdfunding. So we were talking about the whole necessity of taking loans. So here students are not even able to avail loans and they're resorting to crowdfunding. And to my mind, a few hundred students getting a few hundred Dalit students getting foreign education should not still make us lose sight of the larger struggle of universal and egalitarian higher education in India. Because all this aspiration to go abroad is also a symptom of the dilapidation of the public university system in India. And the euphoria around a few Dalit students getting selected abroad should not still make us lose sight of the larger struggle to reclaim the egalitarian space of the private university. So that's what I'll say.
Right, right, right. Any more?
Uh, Sridhar, if I could just ask again
Yeah.
a random question to Ankit. Ankit, terrific. I mean, I'm just still processing your paper, and it's just so full of such powerful questions. So just one question, which is that, of course, I mean, the classic equivalent of affirmative action for the private university, the liberal arts, the private liberal arts university setting is financial aid, right, or waiver. Now my question is, and it's, of course, I mean, it's a horribly corrupt kind of structural mechanism, right? So insofar as it makes the logic of funding or makes the agent of funding the private individual and not the public institution, right? So it shifts the focus of funding altogether, right? So but my question is, what does financial aid do to the question of social justice?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, because the kind of model that I was speaking about, the entry model of inclusion that is followed in, say, public universities, you see a sort of a different model followed in private universities, where there is this model of cross subsidization. So one person is paying a lot of fees in order to subsidize the education of a marginalized student. But here, the kind of inclusion that is practiced only ends up making the included person feel a sense of unjust gratitude towards the ones who have performed that act of inclusion for them, so to say, by shelling out so much money from their own pockets. And such a environment of learning where there is this imbalance of gratitude from one set of students to another cannot be called an egalitarian and a just space of learning at all, where there will be lots of self confidence issues to even speak to the people who will be eternally resentful that, okay, it's from our money that you guys are even able to study here. So that's not going to make up for an egalitarian classroom at all, because of which we need to call out these measures as not related to justice in any sense. Yeah.
Okay, I just had one small factual question to ask of Akash Bhattacharya. You don't have to give me the answer now, Akash, but then this is something that I would be interested to know. You were talking at length about the adoption of NEP in toto in the state of Karnataka, and you talked at length on school education. My question is, how and in what way does the private sector schooling come into this entire thing? how do how does the private sector subscribe to this? That was one thing that I would like to know, but then we can of course talk of it at a later point of time, because we are really out of time, as I understand. uh, yes, please. Sure, Swati, sure. So on that note, it's been a wonderful session, and I do not say this just for lip service. And I really, really hope Samana and the organizers will ensure that there is a publication out of this, because these are deliberations that should not be just lost, in a 2 hour session. These should encourage larger debates in the academia. That said, thank you everybody, and I pass over now to Samana, or if Shorab is there, to conclude the session. Thank you everybody.
Um, okay. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And I'm really, really sorry, people, that I have to rush you all. I would love to listen to you all discussing about different aspects of higher education that you people spoke about. But, I don't like technology. Like Deva hates technology, but I'm trying to deal with it in the best manner possible.